minoriti kira-kira RM31 juta. Ini di sebalik pendapatan sebelum faedah, cukai, susut nilai dan pelunasan sebanyak RM211 juta dan perolehan sebanyak RM1.10 bilion.
Tenaga Nasional Berhad TNB telah melantik Datuk Megat Jalaluddin Megat Hassan sebagai Presiden dan Ketua Pegawai Eksekutif CEO baru berkuat kuasa 1 Mac 2024. TNB dalam makluman pada Bursa Malaysia pada Khamis berkata Megat Jalaluddin dilantik oleh pemegang saham khas Menteri Kewangan diperbadankan bagi tempoh 2 tahun berkuat kuasa 1 Mac 2024 hingga 29 Februari 2026. Megat Jalaluddin 58 tahun yang ketika ini merupakan Ketua Pegawai Operasi Kumpulan akan menggantikan Datuk Seri Baharin Din. TNB dalam makluman berasingan berkata Baharin akan melepaskan jawatan beliau sebagai Presiden dan CEO TNB serta jawatan pengarah di anak syarikat berkaitan dalam kumpulan syarikat TNB. Menurutnya, Megat Jalaluddin membina kerjaya di TNB dengan berkhidmat dalam pelbagai jawatan kejuruteraan dan pengurusan syarikat termasuk perancangan perniagaan dan strategik, pembangunan perniagaan, pengurusan projek, pembaikan proses perniagaan, perkhidmatan pemeteraian dan perkhidmatan kejuruteraan. Honda Malaysia secara rasmi melancarkan kereta utility sukan SUV CR-V serba baharu dengan reka bentuk luaran yang elegan serta dalaman yang premium dan luas. Model generasi ke-6 itu bakal mendefinisikan semula pasaran SUV dan memperlihatkan DNA Honda melalui teknologi-teknologi canggih dan rekaan baharu.
Dengan pilihan 2 enjin dan tersedia dalam 4 varian, CR-V serba baharu menawarkan pilihan khusus untuk memenuhi kehendak dan keperluan pelbagai pelanggan. Enjin EHEV 2.0 liter menjadi tonggak CR-V serba baharu bagi varian RS. Model ini dipadankan dengan transmisi boleh laras berterusan elektrik bagi menyediakan prestasi enjin cemerlang, penjimatan minyak serta kesesuaian kuasa tinggi. Bagi pengalaman pemanduan yang lebih optimum, ia juga hadir dengan sistem audio premium 12 pembesar suara daripada Bose.
SUV CR-V ni special sebab ia merupakan produk pertama yang Honda Malaysia assemble di Malaysia. So itu pertama sekali, dan satu lagi kita tengok dari segi SUV baharu ni, dari segi dia punya design, it's very elegant and very modern design outside and also inside, and of course the introduction of the new powertrain 2.0 EHEV powertrain.
Bagi variant S, E atau V pula, ia didatangkan dengan enjin berprestasi tinggi 1.5 liter VTEC Turbo. 3 varian berkenaan dijual pada harga atas jalan tanpa insurans RM181,900 bagi V. E bermula RM169,900 dan S dari RM159,900. Manakala varian EHEV RS akan tersedia pada awal 2024 dan harga akan diumumkan tidak lama lagi. CR-V serba baharu didatangkan dalam 5 warna dengan buat pertama kali Honda Malaysia memperkenalkan Canyon River Blue Metallic. Maklumat lanjut dan pandu uji CR-V serba baharu, pelanggan boleh mengunjungi mana-mana 101 pengedar sah Honda seluruh negara.
Baik, kita akan teruskan berkongsi mengenai data terkini ataupun laporan daripada Jabatan Perakaan Malaysia DOSM untuk kita lihat bagaimanakah statistik permakasaan wanita dalam domen terpilih Malaysia untuk kita teliti pada tahun 2022. Kalau anda terlihat seperti yang anda dapat lihat di skrin anda, indeks jurang gender Malaysia MGGI 2022 meningkat sedikit kepada 0.694 atau bersamaan 69%. Dan kita nak lihat daripada domen peluang dan penyertaan ekonomi wanita pada tahun 2022 telah mencatatkan sebanyak 0.644 untuk indeks jurang gender Malaysia. Daripada peluang dan penyertaan ekonomi terbagi kepada 2 aspek untuk kita teliti, kadar penyertaan tenaga buruh KPTB wanita lebih rendah berbanding lelaki sedikit, iaitu wanita mencatatkan sebanyak 55.8% penyertaan wanita dalam tenaga buruh berbanding lelaki yang dicatatkan sebanyak 80%. Manakala anggaran pendapatan diperoleh bagi setiap RM100 gaji dan upah diterima lelaki, wanita menerima RM66 sen. Di sini anda dapat saksikan wanita mencatatkan secara keseluruhan RM42,080, manakala lelaki RM63,117 lebih tinggi berbanding kaum wanita. Manakala daripada aspek penggubal undang-undang pegawai kanan dan pengurusan, untuk kita lihat penyertaan wanita, hampir 1/4 daripada jumlah penggubal undang-undang pegawai kanan dan pengurus adalah wanita, iaitu sebanyak 24.6% penyertaan dari wanita. Manakala profesional dan pekerja teknikal, peratus wanita sebagai profesional dan pekerja teknikal lebih rendah berbanding lelaki dengan mencatatkan sebanyak 40.7%. Dan ini adalah daripada segi penyertaan wanita dalam ekonomi. Selain itu, pencapaian pendidikan, untuk kita lihat kadar literasi adalah daripada umur 15 hingga 64 tahun. Wanita mencatatkan sebanyak rendah sedikit berbanding lelaki sebanyak 96.9%, hampir mencecah 97%, manakala kadar enrolment kasar peringkat rendah adalah lebih tinggi dalam kalangan wanita yang telah mencatatkan sebanyak 98.8% lebih tinggi berbanding lelaki, manakala peringkat rendah sebanyak 94.9% kadar enrolment kasar dalam kalangan wanita. Selain itu, kesihatan dan kehidupan, ia mencatatkan indeks sebanyak 0.961 dan jangkaan hayat ketika lahir, wanita dijangka boleh hidup sebanyak 49 tahun lebih lama berbanding lelaki, iaitu total jumlah 76.4 tahun. Manakala nisbah jantina ketika lahir, terdapat 938 bayi perempuan bagi setiap 1,000 bayi lelaki. Seterusnya, penguasaan politik wanita adalah direkodkan sebanyak 0.102, di mana wanita di parlimen sebanyak 13.5% adalah wanita dalam ahli parlimen. Manakala wanita dalam jawatan menteri adalah sebanyak lebih rendah berbanding lelaki pada tahun 2022 dengan mencatatkan sebanyak 17.9%. Tambahan lagi untuk kita teliti daripada penguasaan politik, untuk kita lihat secara sepintas lalu pada tahun 2022, wanita mencatatkan sebanyak 15.7 juta daripada 32.7 juta penduduk, iaitu hampir separuh daripada penduduk di Malaysia. Manakala penduduk wanita mengikut kumpulan umur yang paling tinggi adalah daripada umur 15 hingga 64 tahun, di mana telah mencatatkan sebanyak 10.8 juta bersamaan 68.7%. Paling tinggi berbanding kumpulan umur daripada 0 hingga 14 tahun dan 65 tahun ke atas. Selain itu, untuk kita lihat kadar kelahiran hidup bayi perempuan, daripada 423,124 adalah jumlah kelahiran hidup. Manakala kadar kesuburan jumlah sebanyak 1.6 anak yang dilahirkan bagi setiap wanita dalam tempoh reproduktif sebanyak 15 hingga 49 tahun. Manakala purata gaji dan upah bulanan 2022 untuk golongan wanita, purata adalah sebanyak RM3,140, manakala jumlah secara keseluruhan adalah RM3,212. Nisbah tanggungan wanita untuk kita lihat di sini adalah 45.5, nisbah tanggungan umur muda berada pada paras 34.1 dan nisbah tanggungan umur tua adalah sebanyak 11.3. Dan tahap keganasan terhadap wanita yang dapat direkodkan pada tahun 2022 tahun lepas sebanyak 59.7% daripada 7,982 kes keganasan terhadap wanita dilaporkan pada tahun lepas adalah keganasan berpunca daripada rumah tangga. Terakhir sekali, untuk kita lihat kematian adalah sebanyak 88,735 kematian adalah dari kumpulan golongan wanita, dan ini adalah total jumlah daripada 206,525 jumlah kematian untuk 2022. Dan 5 sebab utama kematian adalah paling tinggi sebabkan pneumonia sebanyak 14.3%. Ini adalah, kita boleh cakap adalah heart disease dan juga adalah penyakit-penyakit internal yang menjadikan 5 sebab utama kematian wanita di Malaysia. Dan ini adalah statistik Pemerkasaan Wanita dalam domen terpilih yang dapat kita saksikan pada tahun 2022. Dan kita nak tambah lagi mengenai pasca rombakan kabinet baru-baru ini. Antara yang mengekalkan jawatannya adalah Datuk Nancy Shukri sebagai Menteri Pembangunan Wanita, Keluarga dan Masyarakat. Manakala timbalan Menteri baru pula ialah Datuk Seri Dr. Noraini Ahmad, merupakan Pembangunan Wanita, Keluarga dan Masyarakat. Dan ketika ini kita akan meneliti bagaimana pemerkasaan wanita selepas rombakan kabinet ini. Apakah usaha atau inisiatif sedia ada yang perlu diteruskan dan adakah yang perlu ditambah baik untuk bergerak ke hadapan. Kita mempersilakan tetamu kita, penganalisis politik UUM, merupakan Profesor Madya Dr. Umur Atiyah Ahmad Zakwan. Saya nak ucapkan terima kasih Prof. Umur kerana sudi meluangkan masa bersama kami. Kalau kita lihat daripada iaitu perkongsian data mengenai indeks jurang gender Malaysia telah meningkat sedikit pada tahun 2022. Pertama sekali, bagaimanakah respon ataupun reaksi Prof terhadap data ini melihat kepada tahap kesesamaan gender secara keseluruhannya bertambah baik untuk tahun 2022?
Okey, terima kasih Nina atas jemputan. Kita sama-sama cuba untuk berbincanglah tentang data terbaru daripada DOSM ni. Kalau kita tengok Nina share tadi jurang gender membesar kalau dibandingkan dengan tahun 2021. Walaupun kita tengok beberapa perpuluhan sahaja gap yang kita tengok daripada 2021 tu, kalau saya nak tengok data di sini 0.692 2021 manakala 2022 0.694. Walaupun begitu, saya merasakan kita kena memberi fokus yang lebih lah terutamanya kepada penumpuan domain ekonomi dan politik disebabkan kedua-dua domain ni masih lagi menjadi memberikan jurang gender yang besar di dalam Malaysia. Okey. Tadi dapat dilihat Nina telah menunjukkan bahawa terdapat penyertaan wanita di dalam sektor pekerjaan hanya 55.8% kalau tak silap saya tadi. Kemudian kita tengok gender pay gap, jurang dari segi bayaran gaji itu adalah sangat besar. Saya pun agak terkejut apabila melihat dalam setiap 100 pendapatan yang kaum lelaki terima RM100, wanita menerima hanyalah RM66.67 sahaja. Kalau kita tengok daripada gender gap yang 2021, bayaran yang diterima oleh kaum wanita adalah RM96.21. Jadi cuba bayangkan di sini saya nak membawa para pendengar agar bukan sahaja pembuat polisi, majikan-majikan untuk meneliti keadaan begini ya. Kerana bagi saya kalaulah kita gender gap yang besar masih lagi berada di dalam sektor pekerjaan ini, saya tak rasa wanita ni ramai akan join sektor pekerjaan, melihatkan kepada keadaan berikut. Di samping faktor-faktor lain yang menyebabkan wanita tidak menyertai sektor pekerjaan. Jadi kita kena tengok ni dengan begitu serius sekali. Saya harap pihak berwajib dapat melihat isu jurang dari segi bayaran kepada kaum wanita dan lelaki. Kalau kita tengok kan negara lain pun mengalami benda-benda yang sama seperti ini. Jadi saya rasa intervention itu perlu dilakukan dan kita kena juga menyediakan satu ekosistem yang lebih kondusif agar wanita lebih berminat untuk kembali menyertai pekerjaan. Sayang sekali kalau kita tidak menggalakkan wanita-wanita ni untuk menyertai pekerjaan. Kerana kalau tengok di indeks dalam domain pendidikan, wanita lebih ramai di peringkat tertiary education. Jadi maksudnya wanita ni adalah trained human resource. Jadi kita dah banyak spend keuangan untuk melatih para wanita, tiba-tiba apabila masuk dalam sektor buruh mereka tiada. Jadi saya merasakan di sini perlu ada lebih komitmen daripada pihak kerajaan. Memang ada dalam bajet 2024 tempoh hari pelbagai insentif diberikan, contohnya tax relief untuk wanita kembali bekerja. Kemudian ada juga bajet-bajet diberikan untuk memperkasakan lagi pusat asuhan. Tapi saya melihat, saya minta maaf jugalah, saya nak cakap ni juga, seolah-olah macam sekadar face value sajalah bagi ada. Kan, bagi ada je. Tapi sejauh mana komitmen monitoring ke arah mencapai kepada target kita, iaitu kerajaan madani target sebanyak 60% wanita untuk menyertai sektor pekerjaan. Jadi kita kena tengok balik, okey, apa yang telah dibuat di dalam sektor pekerjaan ini, majikan-majikan macam mana tindakan yang telah mereka lakukan. Sebab kalau kita tengok kan majikan masih lagi, ada majikan yang masih lagi kurang untuk menyediakan penyediaan anak-anak kan di premis masing-masing. Masih lagi ada. Tapi setakat ini tak ada lagi saya rasa hukuman yang dikenakan ke atas majikan-majikan tersebut. Masih lagi diberi kebebasan walaupun diberi tax insentif, tetapi masih lagi terdapat majikan-majikan yang tidak berbuat demikian. Jadi kemudian kita kena tengok juga apa prosedur-prosedur polisi di peringkat organisasi untuk menyediakan ekosistem ni kepada wanita ni agar mereka berminat, mereka merasakan tidak, mereka boleh mengimbangi antara keluarga dan pekerjaan mereka. Contoh yang saya boleh bagi yang ni sangat menarik ya Nina, dekat Jepun dia ada 2 track dalam pekerjaan. Memang dia dah tu nak dikatakan sebagai, bagi saya, direct discrimination lah di sini. Track satu ni memang untuk profesional, yang siapa yang berminat untuk begitu cemerlang dalam pekerjaan. Track yang kedua ni selalunya yang diambil oleh wanita. Wanita yang apabila dapat anak dia akan masuk track kedua. Track kedua ni dia lebih flexible hours. Jadi itu menyebabkan wanita ni ramai yang kurang lah berada di posisi yang atas. Jadi kita kena sama-sama serius tentang membangunkan sektor care ekonomi kita, care polisi kita, agar kalau nak tengok 60% tu kena buat macam tu lah Nina.
Baik, seperti yang dikongsikan oleh Prof Umus sendiri, kalau kita harus lihat daripada organisasi untuk lihat dasar-dasar di peringkat organisasi ni, adakah mereka memenuhi apa yang diperlukan dalam memperkasakan golongan wanita ini? Kalau kita lihat selain daripada rombakan kabinet dalam usaha untuk memkukuhkan lagi sebenarnya agenda madani, adakah kita lihat secara mendalam dalam struktur atau dasar politik yang dapat memudahkan peningkatan perwakilan wanita terutama dalam decision making bodies ini?
Okey, sebenarnya apabila berlaku rombakan kabinet ni, kami para wanita, Nina, kita lah semua kita sangat mengharapkan agar gandingan antara Datuk Nancy dan Datuk Sri Nuraini ni lebih serius, bukan saya kata tak serius, maksudnya lebih lagi committed ke arah merapatkan jurang gender di dalam politik. Sebab inilah jurang gender yang paling teruk sekali. Saya pun tak tahulah, kadang-kadang sampai pening kepala kita pun duk memikir macam mana nak buat kan. Jadi melihat kepada, saya pernah buat kajian sendiri dalam debat belanjawan 5 tahun saya buat dalam parlimen, saya tak ingat parlimen keberapa, lama dulu. Dan ketika itu dalam saya punya konteks analisis, saya mendapati Datuk Sri Nuraini sebenarnya sangat aktif dalam memperjuangkan isu-isu wanita di dalam debat beliau lah. Jadi saya mengharapkan sentimen yang sama, semangat yang sama apabila beliau berada di dalam Kementerian Wanita ini. Dan saya merasakan sebenarnya kita semua sedar pun, dan ramai pemimpin wanita pun sedar akan senario ni yang kena buat juga macam mana pun. Kita tak boleh kena ada anjakan, kena ada transformasi di dalam pembuatan dasar. Kita ada dasar sekurang-kurangnya 30% wanita di dalam pembuat keputusan public sector, tapi itu hanya adalah policy statement sahaja, walaupun semangat itu digunakan dalam sektor korporat. Sektor korporat kita nampak perubahan tersebut, ada action taken, ada bajet diberi. Tetapi malangnya dari segi politik ni dia macam stuck tau, dia macam tak ke mana-mana. Jadi saya mengharapkan sangatlah kabinet yang baru ni gandingan Datuk Nancy, Datuk Sri Nuraini agar tampil lebih agresif sebab now or never. Kalau tengok data pun kita regressing dalam representasi dalam parlimen. Dan representasi dalam pembuat keputusan ni, legislature ni penting. Baik. Sebab di situlah kita nak bawa suara-suara on the ground, suara-suara wanita kan. Jadi kalau tak ada representasi, macam mana nak bawa suara-suara wanita ni? Dan suara-suara wanita bukan suara wanita saja. Suara wanita ni suara rakyat. Sebab kita rapat dengan rakyat. Jadi saya haraplah Datuk Menteri dan Timbalan Menteri kita ni lebih sahutlah kita punya laungan ni untuk menambahkan lagi
Baik,
jumlah wanita.
Saya pun nak ucap terima kasih kepada Prof. Umu kerana membawakan suara Umu di program Niaga Awani untuk membawakan bagaimana langkah-langkah antara strategi untuk kita memperkasakan lagi wanita bergerak ke hadapan. Sudah tentu banyak perkara yang perlu diteliti dan ditambah baik agar kita dapat menjadikan iaitu pembangunan wanita lebih lestari. Sekali lagi saya ucapkan terima kasih kepada penganalisis politik UUM Profesor Madya Dr. Umu Atiyah Ahmad Zakwan, dan kami akan berhenti rehat seketika dan kembali selepas ini.
December 16, 2023, the Malaysia Women and Girls Forum, MWGF, is back. MWGF The Review is a special feature on Astro AWANI, tracking our national progress for enhancing the well-being of Malaysia's women and girls. Join us as we speak to ministers, academics, and civil society organizations about what it takes to achieve gender equality and the 2030 SDGs. Catch MWGF The Review live on Saturday 16 December 2 p.m. and the repeat on Monday 18 December at 10 a.m. Brought to you by the United Nations and UNFPA Malaysia, supported by Astro AWANI.
Siapakah Gempak Most Wanted 2023? Anda yang akan menentukannya.
Layari www.gempakmostwantedawards.com sekarang untuk mengundi.
Gempak Most Wanted Awards terpaling trending.
Kurang 16 hari lagi memasuki tahun 2024, beberapa faktor perlu kita beri perhatian sama ada di peringkat domestik dan global yang mungkin akan memberi impak kepada pertumbuhan ekonomi, pergerakan bursa saham serta nilai mata wang ringgit. Dan untuk mengulas berkenaan unjuran tahun 2024, kita bersama saya menerusi Google Meet adalah Abdul Muiz Murhalim, merupakan pakar ekonomi MIDF Research. Mungkin saya nak ucapkan terima kasih kerana sudi meluangkan masa bersama kami dan berbakikan lebih kurang 2 minggu masuk tahun 2024. Pertama sekali, mungkin kita boleh recap tahun 2023 dan apa mungkin jangkaan MIDF Research kepada pertumbuhan KDNK sebenar untuk tahun ini.
Okey, kalau kita lihat kepada pertumbuhan bagi 2023, kita menjangkakan memang kadar pertumbuhan akan lebih sederhana. Yang mana kita dapati pertumbuhan tahun lepas yang lebih daripada 8% yang dicatat pada 2022 banyak berkait rapat dengan kesan asas rendah, base yang rendah disebabkan pembukaan semula ekonomi. Namun kita menjangka memang pertumbuhan akan lebih normal dan kembali iaitu lebih rendah sekitar 4.2%. Ini kerana kita dapati kita juga melihat kepada kekangan yang berlaku disebabkan oleh kelembapan aktiviti dagangan luar. Pada peringkat awal kita menjangkakan pertumbuhan dagangan luar ni adalah berkait rapat dengan kerana penurunan harga komoditi. Tetapi dalam tahun 2023 ni kita dapati sebenarnya volume ataupun jumlah permintaan global sebenarnya menunjukkan penurunan. Ini berkait rapat dengan kelembapan yang kita lihat berlaku dalam sektor perkilangan dan juga aktiviti pengeluaran di peringkat antarabangsa. Sebagai negara yang terbuka dan terlibat dalam aktiviti perdagangan antarabangsa ini, Malaysia terkesan dengan kelembapan sektor perkilangan global. Dan ini menyebabkan negara kita hanya bergantung kepada satu enjin, iaitu kita dapati kekuatan ataupun pemulihan dari sudut perbelanjaan pengguna mampu menyokong pertumbuhan ekonomi negara. Dan oleh sebab itu kita masih terus mengekalkan jangkaan pertumbuhan KDNK mampu dicapai pada paras 4.2% bagi tahun 2023.
Memasuki tahun 2024, apa mungkin jangkaan MIDF Research kepada pertumbuhan KDNK serta faktor yang bakal mempengaruhinya?
Okey, pertama sekali kita dapati terdapat tanda-tanda pemulihan dari segi aktiviti perdagangan antarabangsa kerana contohnya kita dapati ekspor menurun dengan kadar yang lebih perlahan pada kadar negatif 4.4% pada bulan Oktober. Ini sedikit sebanyak memberi gambaran terdapat kestabilan dan juga tanda-tanda pemulihan dari segi perdagangan serantau, dan juga kita menjangka momentum ini akan berterusan. Oleh sebab itu bagi tahun 2024 kita menjangkakan pemulihan dagangan luar ini akan memberi sokongan kepada pertumbuhan KDNK negara untuk melonjak kepada 4.7% berbanding 4.2% yang saya nyatakan tadi untuk tahun ini. Pada masa sama kita masih menjangka pertumbuhan domestik akan terus memberi sokongan kepada pertumbuhan ekonomi negara kita, kerana kita menjangka dari segi pasaran buruh dijangka akan terus kekal sihat. Pada masa yang sama sumbangan tunai rahmah dan juga bantuan kerajaan yang diberikan turut dijangka akan memberi sokongan kepada pertumbuhan ataupun peningkatan pendapatan isi rumah. Dan kita menjangka ini akan memberi sokongan kepada keseluruhan pertumbuhan ekonomi negara. Kalau kita lihat dari sudut pelaburan pula, kita menjangka peniaga akan contohnya aktiviti sektor pembinaan juga akan turut disokong oleh projek-projek infrastruktur yang telah dinyatakan dalam rancangan Malaysia ke-12 seperti pembinaan lebuh raya Pen Borneo dan juga pembinaan ECRL. Dan ini kita yakin keadaan ekonomi negara mampu untuk terus kekal mencatat pertumbuhan positif pada tahun hadapan.
Apa mungkin downside risk yang perlu diberi perhatian? Dalam taklimat sebelum ini, MIDF menyatakan berkenaan kemungkinan kemelesetan di Amerika Syarikat serta krisis geopolitik di Asia Barat yang mungkin meluas dan melibatkan banyak negara.
Okey, betul. Kalau kita amati, kebanyakan risiko ataupun kelembapan yang berlaku adalah berkait rapat dengan prestasi pertumbuhan yang lebih perlahan bagi rakan dagang utama Malaysia, contohnya seperti di Amerika dan juga di negara China. Sebab kita lihat lebih kurang 1/5 daripada jumlah dagangan adalah disokong oleh aliran kepada kedua negara utama ini. Melihat kepada pertumbuhan ekonomi Amerika, bagi tahun 2023 sebenarnya adalah lebih baik daripada jangkaan. Cuma disebabkan paras Fed Funds Rate ataupun kadar faedah yang tinggi, kita menyangkakan permintaan Amerika akan lebih perlahan. Ini menjurus kepada pertumbuhan yang lebih perlahan yang diunjurkan oleh Federal Reserve sendiri yang menjangka ekonominya akan lebih perlahan pada 1.4% tahun hadapan berbanding 2.5 ataupun 2.6% yang diunjurkan bagi tahun ini. Cuma dari segi risiko kemelesetan tu masih menjadi satu kebimbangan kerana kelembapan yang berlaku mungkin akan lebih laju daripada apa yang kita jangka, kerana pada kita lihat pada paras kadar faedah sedia ada, ini adalah satu paras yang tinggi. Kerana ini memberi kekangan kepada para pengguna di Amerika, khususnya bagi mereka yang mengalami masalah untuk terus membayar hutang mereka. Dan secara tidak langsung kita menjangka ini mungkin akan memberi kesan negatif kepada kemampuan pengguna untuk mengekalkan pembelanjaan yang lebih tinggi pada tahun hadapan. Pada sudut yang lain, situasi geopolitik juga adalah menjadi satu kebimbangan sebab kita lihat dari segi contohnya apa yang berlaku melibatkan peperangan Ukraine dan Rusia, ianya menjejaskan aktiviti perdagangan global. Cuma dari segi geopolitik setakat ini walaupun keadaannya masih belum selesai, cuma dari segi risiko yang berlaku melibatkan geopolitik di Timur Tengah, ianya saya kira masih tidak memberi kesan yang signifikan. Cuma kita masih terus perlu mengambil kira kelembapan ataupun gangguan kepada aktiviti dagangan luar mungkin terus sama akan menjejas prestasi dagangan Malaysia bagi tahun hadapan.
Kalau kita lihat, The Fed telah mengkarkan kadar faedahnya dan terdapat kemungkinan juga mengurangkan kadar faedah. Bagaimana ini akan memberi respon kepada Malaysia, terutama berkait pasaran saham dan nilai mata wang ringgit? Kalau boleh saya mirakan juga, antara data yang dikeluarkan oleh 2024 Market Outlook menunjukkan pertumbuhan US adalah dikatakan, kalau kita boleh mira sikit, ini menunjukkan iaitu ekonomi Amerika Syarikat akan dijangkakan untuk tumbuh sederhana pada tahun 2024. Bagaimana Muiz?
Ya, seperti yang saya katakan tadi, kalau kita lihat dari segi unjuran bagi ekonomi Amerika, ianya dijangka akan lebih perlahan. Jadi ini menjadi satu asas kenapa Fed Funds Rate ataupun kadar faedah yang ditetapkan oleh Federal Reserve tidak perlu dikekalkan pada paras yang tinggi. Kerana sekiranya permintaan mula perlahan. Federal Reserve boleh untuk mengurangkan kadar faedahnya bagi memberi sokongan kepada pertumbuhan ekonomi agar terus mampan. Pada masa yang sama, dari segi jangkaan pergerakan dana asing, kita menjangkakan jangkaan Federal Reserve untuk menurunkan kadar faedahnya akan memberi kesan positif kepada pasaran di luar, kerana kita menjangka dana asing luar akan mula kembali masuk kepada pasaran-pasaran seperti emerging market, dan juga kita menjangka ini akan turut memberi satu kesan positif kepada pasaran di Malaysia. Kalau kita lihat apa yang berlaku dalam bulan November sendiri, aliran masuk kepada pasaran bond ataupun pasaran hutang, kita dapati ianya terus mencatatkan peningkatan setelah kita dapati pada 2-3 bulan sebelumnya adalah aliran keluar kerana kebimbangan Fed Funds Rate mungkin akan terus dinaikkan. Jadi seperti yang saya nyatakan, kita menyangka aliran asing ini akan kembali kepada masuk semula ke pasaran tempatan. Oleh sebab itu kita menyangka akan terdapat sokongan agar yang mana pasaran saham dan juga pergerakan nilai ringgit akan terus bertambah baik, dan kita menyangka ringgit contohnya kita mengunjurkan ringgit akan terus mengukuh sehingga tahun hadapan.
Baik, itu adalah antara perkongsian ujuran 2024 untuk kita lihat bagaimanakah prospek Malaysia bergerak ke hadapan. Sekali lagi saya ucapkan terima kasih kepada Adu Muiz Mohalim, merupakan pakar ekonomi MIDF Research, dan semua ini akan kami rangkumkan dalam astroawani.com dan semua platform digital Astro Awani. Baik, kita akan teruskan dengan pergerakan dan perkembangan ringgit untuk kita lihat setakat 15 Disember 2023. Kalau boleh saya kongsikan, ringgit pada pagi ini berada pada paras lebih kurang 4.667. Dan untuk kita lihat bagaimanakah prestasi ataupun tempoh pergerakan nilai ringgit Malaysia dalam tempoh seminggu daripada lebih kurang 10 Disember sehinggalah hari ini, ringgit kita berada lebih kurang pada paras, kita boleh cakap julat adalah range dia daripada paras 4.660 sehinggalah hampir mencecah 4.705. Dan ini adalah kita boleh cakap range ataupun purata pergerakan nilai ringgit kita dalam tempoh seminggu untuk kita teliti, dan ini adalah prestasi ringgit yang dapat kita saksikan setakat ini. Dan saya akan beralih kepada prestasi Bursa Malaysia untuk kita teliti bagaimanakah iaitu prestasi setakat pagi ini, di mana semalam ditutup dalam wilayah positif pada Khamis, mencecah paras tertinggi harian selepas mengambil petunjuk daripada beberapa indeks rantau utama. Dan indeks rantau utama secara amnya merekodkan prestasi meningkat susulan isyarat pergerakan kukuh dari Wall Street dalam tempoh semalaman apabila jawatan kuasa pasaran terbuka Rizab Persekutuan FOMC Amerika Syarikat mengekalkan kadar faedah. Dan prestasi Bursa Malaysia setakat pagi ini untuk kita teliti berada pada paras 1457.29 atau 0.07 atau sekarang ini 0.08%. Ini adalah update yang terkini, iaitu peningkatan sebanyak 1.17, dan prestasi Bursa Malaysia dalam tempoh 5 hari untuk kita lihat daripada Isnin hinggalah Jumaat hari ini. Bermula daripada Isnin kita dapat saksikan iaitu prestasi ataupun trend Bursa Malaysia meningkat daripada paras lebih kurang 1,440. Ia meningkat sehinggalah mencapai tahap terkini iaitu 1,457.46. Dan ini adalah prestasi ringgit dan Bursa Malaysia yang dapat kita saksikan ketika ini, dan kita akan beralih kepada laporan seterusnya. Penstrukturan semula Kementerian Sumber Asli Alam Sekitar dan Perubahan Iklim NRECC yang dibahagikan kepada 2 kementerian tidak akan mengubah objektif dan hala tuju kerajaan, terutamanya dalam kelestarian alam sekitar. Menteri Sumber Asli dan Kelestarian Alam Nazmi Ahmad berkata, pemisahan itu bukanlah sesuatu yang tidak pernah dilakukan sebelum ini, dan melihat rombakan itu menjadikan fungsi kementerian lebih inklusif dan efektif.
Kalau dulu kita pernah beberapa tahun lepas lah, dia pernah ada Kementerian Sumber Asli dan Alam Sekitar NRE, dan juga ada Kementerian Tenaga Hijau dan Air KETA. Jadi maksudnya pernah berlaku tentang pemisahan sebegini. Jadi almost mirror lah, saya boleh katakan, apa yang pemisahan ini dengan apa yang bentuk kementerian pada waktu NRE dan KETA. Jadi bermakna saya tanggungjawab atau bidang kuasa saya pada sumber asli, termasuklah soal perhutanan, perhilitan, mineral, tanah, dan juga meliputi soal alam sekitar dan perubahan iklim, merupakan fokus di bawah kementerian ini.
Sesudah rombakan kabinet diumumkan Perdana Menteri Datuk Seri Anwar Ibrahim pada Selasa, Nazmi akan bekerjasama rapat dengan Kementerian Peralihan Tenaga dan Daya Guna Awam yang diketuai Datuk Seri Fadilah Yusof. Kementerian Fadilah akan menyelia kemudahan awam seperti elektrik, bekalan air dan sistem kumbahan, manakala portfolio Nazmi akan mengendalikan semua asli seperti hutan, tanah, pemeliharaan, hidupan liar, kelestarian alam sekitar dan perubahan iklim.
Kerajaan dalam peringkat awal untuk meminda Akta Bekalan Elektrik 1990 atau Akta 447 untuk menyertakan lanskap kawal selia semasa sektor tenaga Malaysia. Pindaan itu juga seiring dengan pembaharuan pasaran elektrik.
Akta 447 adalah untuk mengadakan peruntukan bagi pengawal seliaan industri pembekalan elektrik pada harga munasabah, pelesenan, pepasangan elektrik, pengawalan pepasangan, aspek keselamatan serta penggunaan elektrik dengan cekap. Setiausaha bahagian kanan bahagian bekalan elektrik Kementerian Peralihan Tenaga dan Daya Guna Awam, Marina Mahpud berkata, kementerian sedang mengadakan libat urus dengan pihak pengawal selia seperti Jabatan Peguam Negara dan dijangka menangani isu yang dibangkitkan dalam masa terdekat. Marina antara ahli panel yang membincangkan laporan bertajuk Competitive Neutrality in the Malaysian Power Sector, Removing Barriers for a Greener and More Innovative Energy Industry yang dikeluarkan Institut Demokrasi dan Hal Ehwal Ekonomi IDS pada Khamis. IDS dalam laporan itu menyenaraikan dua syor kepada sektor tenaga Malaysia. Pertama, pembaharuan menyeluruh terhadap industri bekalan elektrik bagi meningkatkan bahagian tenaga boleh baharu TBB. Kedua, meningkatkan keneutralan daya saing melibatkan syarikat berkaitan kerajaan dan industri bekalan elektrik. Fellow kanan IDS Renato Lima de Oliveira berkata, pelaksanaan keneutralan secara berdaya saing dalam sektor tenaga Malaysia akan membantu peralihan tenaga. Laporan yang ditulis oleh D. Oliveira itu menjungkil aspek penting industri tenaga Malaysia, menangani halangan dan mengesyorkan laluan kepada persaingan yang adil dalam kalangan pemain industri bagi membolehkan peralihan cekap ke arah penggunaan TBB di Malaysia.
Media tempatan dianggarkan kerugian kira-kira RM2 bilion daripada jumlah RM4.5 bilion hasil iklan tahunan kepada 3 gergasi media sosial iaitu Meta, Google dan TikTok. Menteri Komunikasi Fahmi Fadzil berkata, perkara itu antara cabaran terbesar yang dihadapi organisasi media di negara ini.
Katanya isu itu sesuatu yang serius dan perlu diperincikan memandangkan ketika ini hasil daripada iklan hanya dibayar kepada syarikat penyedia platform media sosial dan bukannya kepada organisasi media. Fahmi berkata perlu ada keseimbangan dan semua pihak perlu dibawa ke meja rundingan supaya satu suasana yang kondusif dapat dilaksana dan direalisasikan. Dia berkata demikian selepas hadir menyampaikan ucap tama pada Majlis Perasmian Transcending Disinformation Towards Responsible Media Consumption Anjuran Institut Pembangunan Penyiaran Asia Pasifik AIBD di Kuala Lumpur pada Khamis. Beliau pada masa yang sama berharap platform media sosial akan mengadakan banyak sesi libat urus dengan organisasi media untuk membantu mereka menggunakan platform media sosial dengan berkesan dan cekap.
Care Plus Group berhad melancarkan Care Plus Mall yang dibangunkan bagi menyediakan rangkaian kenderaan elektrik beserta stesen pengecasan pantas pusat latihan TVET, penyelesaian panel solar bagi kegunaan rumah dan komersial serta kemudahan bersukan dan hiburan bagi seisi keluarga. Majlis pembukaan itu disempurnakan Menteri Besar Negeri Sembilan, Datuk Seri Ahmad Harun di Pusat Komersial Auckland, Seremban, Negeri Sembilan. Ketua Pegawai Eksekutif Care Plus, Lim Kuishan berkata, Care Plus kini menerokai potensi perniagaan dalam bidang teknologi hijau dan tenaga baharu termasuk dalam kelengkapan solar dan juga kenderaan elektrik.
Hari ini di Care Plus Mall, kami mempunyai pusat jualan, servis, alat ganti dan baik pulih iaitu 4S bagi kenderaan elektrik jenama Meta dan juga peralatan solar. Memandangkan keluasan Care Plus Mall yang jauh lebih besar dari yang diperlukan oleh dua perniagaan ini, perniagaan yang saya sebutkan tadi, kami telah menjemput beberapa perniagaan yang berkaitan untuk bersama memajukan Care Plus Mall ini. Antaranya ialah pihak Jentari yang bersetuju untuk memasang stesen pengecas DC berkapasiti 180 hingga 250 kW sebanyak 6 unit di sini. Apabila pemasangan stesen pengecas DC ini siap nanti, yang dijangka pada suku tahun kedua tahun depan, kami menjangkakan tempat ini akan menjadi salah satu tempat persinggahan utama pengguna EV, termasuknya kenderaan perdagangan seperti EV bus dan EV van untuk mengecas kenderaan mereka.
Tambahnya, Care Plus turut bekerjasama dengan kumpulan Go Auto bagi menerokai bidang berkaitan industri EV. Sementara itu, pengerusi kumpulan Go Auto, Dato' SM Azli SM Nasimuddin Kamal berkata, satu kerjasama yang telah dipersetujui di antara kedua-dua belah pihak dalam perimportan dan peredaran kenderaan elektrik jenama NETA dan pemasangan kenderaan tenaga baru New Energy Vehicles, pelbagai model di kilang pembuatan dan pemasangan yang sedang dirancang di kawasan perindustrian Cembung, Rembau, Negeri Sembilan.
Fasa pertama projek ini akan melibatkan pembangunan assembly plant yang dijangka akan bermula pada suku pertama pada tahun 2024. Manakala fasa kedua dan ketiga akan bermula masing-masing pada tahun 2026 dan 2028. Anggaran keseluruhan nilai pembangunan kasar, projek pembangunan kilang pembuatan dan pemasangan kenderaan tenaga baru berserta vendor ini adalah kira-kira Malaysia RM600 juta.
Menurutnya lagi, kilang baharu tersebut bukan sahaja dapat memasang kenderaan jenama NETA, namun terbuka juga kepada jenama-jenama EV lain yang berhasrat untuk melakukan pemasangan secara tempatan CKD apabila siap kelak. Jangan ke mana, kita akan bersama rakan tugas Nina Rozman yang akan membawakan perkembangan seterusnya di Niaga Spotlight selepas ini.
Kerajaan melaksanakan audit subsidi minyak masak selepas ia dijangka meningkat 4 kali ganda menjelang hujung tahun depan.
Angkatan Pertahanan Awam Malaysia APM memilih Sabah sebagai kanvas kajian bagi meremajakan semula organisasi itu.
Sarawak telah menerima kehadiran 3.18 juta pengunjung ke negeri itu, melepasi lebih awal sasaran untuk tahun 2023.
Sabah dan Sarawak mempunyai potensi besar sebagai pelengkap pusat ekonomi di Semenanjung.
17 Disember ini, Demak Singa Malaysia kembali secara langsung. Alami keajaibannya disertai bintang-bintang misteri dan karakter-karakter melangkaui imajinasi. Penuh warna-warni menanti anda untuk diterokai. Siapa di sebalik topeng? Demak Singa Malaysia musim keempat secara langsung di saluran-saluran berikut.
Hello and welcome to Niaga Spotlight with me, Nina Rozman. Niaga Spotlight goes through the week in business and future affairs. Market wars, analysis, industries and insights, we've got you covered right here on Niaga Spotlight. Well, today we are taking a deep dive and analysing everything COP28. So without further ado, joining me in the studios live is Yang Berhormat Nazmi Ahmad, who's of course made time for us just pretty much fresh after landing from COP28 to discuss all things Malaysia's climate agenda moving forward from here. Yang Berhormat, thank you so much for making time for us. How are you doing today?
Good, thank you.
Fantastic. So I think first and foremost, of course, congratulations are in order. And from there, I would love to begin the conversation by starting off about you telling us in perhaps as much detail as you are able, what exactly is under your purview now under the Ministry of Natural Resources and Environmental Sustainability.
Yeah, hi. So under the new Ministry NRES, basically, the aspects that you have under natural resources, i.e. land, forest conservation, wildlife, minerals, what do you call that, Department of Irrigation and Drainage, that basically falls under natural resources, and environmental sustainability is on the side of the Department of Environment and also the climate change aspects. This mirrors closely to a few years back when there was NRE.
Correct, that's right.
And Ministry of Natural Resources and Environment and KETA, So the other ministry is basically mirrors what Qatar did last time.
And any thoughts on the fact that, well, of course, climate change falls under environmental sustainability. However, not having that as part of the title of the ministry itself, will there be any changes that you perceive?
Well, I think, for us, the name is not there, but I think sustainability also provides a bigger sort of approach to it. Climate change is obviously crucial. We were in the recent COP28, we were very much active and vocal, and I think people noticed Malaysia's presence there. But now the fact that it's now put under sustainability, and this is the first time I believe that sustainability is in a ministry's name, is the fact that it gives us a broader look to the issue of the planetary crisis. Climate change is one of it, but there's also loss of biodiversity and there's environmental degradation. So now it's seen as in a complete way.
Absolutely. Right. So from there, to ease us into the conversation, of course, what are some of your main takeaways before we get a little more granular, having come right back from COP28? You, of course, led what definitely was Malaysia's biggest ever contingent going into COP28, those 2 weeks or so that was spent there on the ground in Dubai. What were some of the most interesting things for us as Malaysia that were developing?
Well, I think as a whole, COP28, I think it was positive. The COP28 presidency, we understand that obviously there were a lot of questions when the fact that the host is a major oil and gas player. But I think at the end of the day, when you look at the UAE consensus that came about, this is the first time that the word fossil fuel is mentioned. In Glasgow, obviously in Sharm el-Sheikh, there were attempts to put it there. In Glasgow, we managed to put coal.
Correct.
But there's still other fossil fuels, and this time the word transitioning away from fossil fuels. There's the whole debate, phase down, phase out, and so on and so forth. But I think that's still significant. It points us in the right direction. Obviously, we have to build on that, coming to the future COPs, for us to go closer to reach what we plan to under the Paris Agreement. But it puts us on the right footing. And secondly, I think what's also positive, loss and damage. It's this fund to help the poorer countries. There's been a lot of talk and demands for it, but this time it has actually been actualized. And I think, of course, there are things that we think can be improved, but the fact that we've seen substantial pledges from some of not just the developed world, but also the rich countries like the UAE itself, is a positive start. Obviously, some of the developed world could have done more, and that is a major issue that we've been facing the last many years. But the actualization of loss and damage, I think, is another positive step forward.
Absolutely. And further from that, YB Nazmi, let's break down about the global stock take, which was also one of the things which was a first-time precedent happening at this COP28. What exactly does it mean, broken down into the kind of vocabulary for, of course, especially the business community and the average rakyat?
Well, the global stock take is for us to measure the journey that we are on to realize the pledges that we made, since Paris. And I think what is, because it's important for us, one, you have to have the target, the pledges and whatnot, but then you have to, every few years, you have to reflect on what's being done for us to reach those targets, because setting targets is one thing, but to realize it is another thing, and that's where the gap often happens. So that is why we need the global stock take, and I think that's where the whole debate on fossil fuels, and when it was finally decided for a transition away from fossil fuels.
That's right.
So, I think that is an important part, but we all realize that it has to be that the whole idea of climate justice has to be there. What we often see is that that the developing countries, the poorer countries, are being put very strict conditions with regards to climate policies. But when it comes to the developed world,
countries that were responsible. They already destroyed not only their own forests and managed to exploit their own resources, but they also exploited our resources for decades, if not centuries. Suddenly, they are allowed to be pragmatic about it.
Correct, exactly. And I think I'm really appreciative of the fact that you're highlighting climate justice, particularly if we look at Malaysia's own carbon emissions, we only contribute to 0.5% overall. So drawing from there, Yang Berhormat, let's go into when it comes to reducing carbon emissions, what is the space that we are at currently at the end of 2023, and how do we move forward, particularly with all that has already been laid out via the NETR that you and your ministry have also worked very hard on over the past year especially?
Well, I think when it comes to look at what we've achieved, we are preparing our LT-LETS, our long-term low-emission development strategy that should be ready by early 2024. We've also, made announcements when earlier this year I said that our approach will be no new coal.
Correct. That's under JPET 2022.
Correct. And we are also going to, the government will also look at JPET 2023 under the new minister, but we've had the discussions at the JPET level, but it has to be presented by the new minister to cabinet. So I think that we make very much different assumptions on what was traditionally planned before. So more focus on solar as per outlined by NETR. So I think that will be making a lot of difference. But I think at the end of the day, we are also looking at how we realize that we need to, for example, strengthen our grid.
Yes, absolutely. It's
because
all
when you
about
have
the grid.
more variable RE coming in, it's not the same as having a few big power plants that are baseload gas or gas or coal. But now you have small houses and properties with solar plants up. So it's different, and we see that other countries also face that problems. So I think that is a major part that we are looking at. It's a major investments that we have to do. Then it's also the other part. Something that we are fortunate is that we have an enormous carbon sink, and that must be protected as much as possible. We committed to 50% of our land area being forest and tree cover in 1992. So far, we have about 54%, but we have to guard it very carefully so that we can maintain that, because that's not many countries have enormous carbon sinks.
That's true. I mean, just drive in the Malaysian countryside, etc., even along the highways tells us that. Moving deeper into the carbon sink ethos, YB, let's look at the fact that whatever it is, our rainforests, of course, are part of that carbon sink. However, there have been recent issues raised around how do we also include palm oil plantations, etc., as part of that carbon sink. Yes or no? What are the ministry's thoughts on this, particularly looking at the fact that now you are also in charge of looking at natural resources itself?
Well, I think to include palm oil as a carbon sink is a bit controversial and challenging. I mean, scientifically it is. Obviously, then the argument is that it came about from it used to be pristine jungles, right? And that was a superior carbon sink, and the process of clearing up, planting up palm oil means that there is a loss of carbon in the process.
Mostly the loss of biodiversity.
Biodiversity, and then you put in fertilizers and all that. But I think so I don't want to go into that debate, because that's a whole contentious debate about whether palm oils are carbon sinks or not. We can take the conservative view that it isn't, but we also have to acknowledge, Malaysia has come up with policies of capping our palm oil. So we have already put a cap to the size of land in our country that can be used for palm oil, one. Secondly, we have Malaysian Sustainability Palm Oil Standards, which is now almost universally adopted in the country.
That's right.
And we also have to recognize that palm oil, you compare it with any other competitor vegetable oil, is the most efficient. It has the highest concentration of energy. So it means that if you want to plant an equivalent soy or sunflower, you need a larger acreage of land.
Or even coconut, for example.
Or, for example, coconut. So you need larger area of land. You need to clear up, bigger amount of forest to do that. You need more water, you need more resources, basically. So in that sense, palm oil is superior than any other vegetable oil. So I think that is where you do face, because you have lobbies from other competitor oils, and it's so ingrained now. And also we have been recognized, Malaysia and Indonesia, the deforestation from palm oil has gone down tremendously. And Malaysia is one of the top countries in reduced deforestation in the study by University of Maryland. So, but you go, when I was in Dubai, I wanted to buy chocolates for my kids, and you go and you see so many of them trying to portray their palm oil free.
The ingredients, right?
The ingredients,
right.
And that is being sold as a virtue when
it's not necessarily
true. Not necessarily true.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for highlighting that, YB. And let's move from there into looking at the reduction of carbon emissions, particularly from the energy and industrial sectors, which of course account for the bulk of Malaysia's total carbon emissions.
Yeah. So yeah, for energy, as mentioned, we already say no new coal. The challenge for us is that we in most Asian countries is the fact that most of our coal plants are young. So any efforts to terminate
the life cycle,
so you compare with the ones in Europe, is already quite mature. So it's easier for them to have early retirement. And we saw, even the mothball power plants in Europe, the moment Ukraine started and the prices of energy went up, they started to access that coal-based energy again. So when I was invited at COP28 to discuss this with President Macron of France and also John Kerry, the climate envoy for the US, the Prime Minister of Vietnam was there, von der Leyen, the President of the European Commission, was there. So I highlighted this, but at the same time, and I hope that this, of course, is subject to the discussions of within the new ministry. Is we were planning to put in under JPAT 2023 will be a request for information on how we can reduce carbon emissions from coal. So this can be done by early retirement. This can be done by mothballing, i.e. they operate at a very minimal level with much reduced emissions, but in the moment, say we need energy,
naturally we do.
We can just raise it up again. So that's, or you can even do co-firing with ammonia or with biomass, like any waste
brown
from palm.
to green swaps,
and brown to green swaps. So those, it's been considered. That was at the level that we were discussing last time, but now it's obviously subject to the new minister to bring that up. And other forms of it is obviously, I think for us, I mean, we've managed it under our 1 year of being 1 year of me being there. We've gone through a few tariff proposals, and even yesterday, Dr. Sri Fadila asked me to present for the next ICPT cycles. So we've gone through a continuous subsidy, retargeting, where the rich are getting less and less subsidies. The bigger companies are also getting less and less subsidies, or even almost none. So this allows people to be more energy efficient. We must remember that's always the first fuel of energy transition. It's not renewable energy, but energy efficiency. So that's happening, and also that they are using more renewable energy as well. So they are, like, if you see now, a lot more factories are putting up solar houses. Last time it may take 7 years or 10 years for you to break even with your investment, but now you can get it in 3 to 5 years because tariffs are higher and solar panels are cheaper. So I think we are seeing that happening, and I think that will contribute a lot in line with the NETR objectives. Now we are 25% renewable energy capacity. By 2050, the target is 70%.
Absolutely, and it's also not something that we'll see the impact of immediately, but the mechanisms have already been put in place. Great, fantastic. From there, YB, let's go into looking at the fact that COP28 has also recognized food and agricultural systems contributing up to 1/3 of all emissions by countries. What are some of Malaysia's challenges as well as solutions or opportunities for looking at decreasing our emissions from food production itself?
Yeah, I think in Malaysia, the main culprits, if you're talking about agriculture, actually in Malaysia, agriculture contributes a relatively low amount. But the challenges come from synthetic fertilizers, it comes from pesticides and also other chemicals. And we have the National Agro-Food Policy and National Agri-Commodity Policy, which sustainability is also embedded in these two policies in terms of developing agriculture policies. So I think for what the government is trying to do is also, one is the ministry under of Agriculture and Food Security. They're trying to promote organic farming as well, because that will reduce the need for chemical fertilizers, which has higher emissions. At the same time, we are looking at also trying to upgrade and expand the sustainable palm oil standards, because with that, we can also have a more sustainable and more efficient mode of farming. So I think that those are among the efforts that we are trying to do to make our agriculture sector much more, to be much more environmental friendly and to have less impact on climate.
Sure. I like the fact that organic produce is also highlighted, but of course that is about scaling so that it's made a lot more affordable for everyone to purchase as well. Right. So from looking at food and agricultural systems, Yang Berhormat, any thoughts about how when it came to COP28, some of the focus areas also looked at people and livelihoods and inclusion of local communities and in particular, of course, indigenous groups. Now, any thoughts about how moving forward, Malaysia can best adhere to not just this ethos, not only because of COP28, but of course because it's beneficial for our local communities as well?
Definitely. I mean, I think we've realized that, the indigenous communities in Malaysia, whether it's the Orang Asli in the peninsula or the Orang Asal in Sabah and Sarawak, a lot of them are living at the front lines when you talk about with our forests or even with our oceans. So they feel it firsthand, right? When there are deforestation, when there is a human-wildlife conflict, a lot of them will be the first hand victims. So the government has been, throughout the years, we have done many efforts. I mean, when I took over, we started a consultative panel on climate change, and we took NGOs, not just the environmental NGOs per se.
That's right.
We also took youth environmental NGOs, but also the indigenous NGOs to give their input. And we will look how we can, refresh this composition to get more voices. We had some of them there at COP28, speaking not only in our panels, but also in other countries.
And how was that received in general?
It was very positive. And I think the other policy that has gained a lot of attention is our community rangers, where now we have 1,500. Next year we are targeting 2,000. And the majority today of the 1,500 are actually from the Orang Asli. So they basically, it's a boots on the ground sort of approach. We know that our wildlife in particular are facing poaching, and we have our own enforcement officers from the wildlife department, but it's a limited number. So by having this, it helps to put boots on the ground, and that has been very positive. And also there are other NGOs or state bodies such as in Royal Belum, there's the Menrak Rangers, and all this have been they've been receiving international recognition at various awards. So I think that has been something that is very positive, and it also helps them, give them a purpose, livelihood while they work on this program. So I think involving them is very, very critical, and tapping onto their traditional knowledge and wisdom is sometimes it can help us fill the gaps. If you take purely, sometimes you take a very academic
or very scientific
approach without understanding the gaps of people who are, it's not the same when you are in an ivory tower or in Putrajaya compared to when you have been there, you've lived there for generations, thousands of years, right? So I think it's very valuable to have them as partners in our journey towards sustainability.
Yeah, it's very heartening to hear that expanding capacity for environmental stewardship by the indigenous Orang Asli and Asal communities is a highlight.
And if I can add
yes,
shortly, is the fact that one of the interesting things that I learned from Menrak, for example, when they wanted to recruit the local Orang Asli community there, what has been interesting is that then they had to do programs not just for the rangers, but also the community in terms of education, teaching, because some of them may even not be able to read and write, for example. So if to be a
literacy
ranger,
as well.
Yeah, so literacy, use of technology, and that has an important, the spillover effects are enormous. So it's not just about them getting that 2,000 ringgit or 1,500 ringgit a month, but it's also about them having the knowledge that can be useful for them and their community in a bigger scale.
Thank you. Thank you for highlighting that as well, Yang Berhormat. We take a quick break now. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back with the rest of the interview with Yang Berhormat, Nik Nazmi, Nik Ahmad on COP28.
Terokai keindahan pulau, tarikan pelancongan dan kehidupan penduduk setempat dalam island checkpoints yang dibawakan khas oleh Tourism Malaysia.
Ada kick dia. Jom kita pergi tengok. Dia main turun je, tak cilah kan?
Macam-macam lagi lah.
Bau dia.
Ini bubur kunyit, boyak garam.
Experience yang baru, kami. Memang cantik.
Setiap Sabtu, 8.30 malam di semua platform Astro AWANI.
Dua beradik dibesarkan oleh keluarga angkat penuh konflik.
Ini kau mahal ni.
Tempat aku belajar tu banyak anak orang kaya.
Macam ni ke anak yang dibesarkan selama ni?
Sekarang ni masa dekat balas jasa lagi.
Mencari jawapan kepada tragedi lalu.
Satu hari saya akan jadi macam tu. Angan-angan boleh tapi kena...
Parah ni!
Sebabkan dia ni, mak kita tak bersalah tu mati. Aku janji kita akan dapat keadilan tu, mak.
Jangan lupa janji di Astro Ria dan Astro Go.
Welcome back to Niag Spotlight, still with me, Tamina Kausji, and today, of course, we are discussing COP28 and Malaysia's path moving forward. Yang Berhormat, so continuing the discussion, let's look now and zone in on Altera, which, of course, is the $30 billion catalytic climate investment fund that was launched at COP28. Some thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, Altera is basically trying to leverage on private markets to invest when it comes to climate investments, and I think it will play an important role. And obviously money is a crucial thing, especially for developing countries. Malaysia alone, the calculation is from 2023 to 2050, we need 1.2 trillion ringgit. So that's a big amount.
Yes.
We still need to spend money on schools, we need to spend money on roads, we need to spend money on welfare, and so on and so forth, hospitals. So we can't, our annual budget now is 200 over billion ringgit, but
it's just about balancing everything.
Yes, that's a big challenge. And so for us, I think why this Altera and all that will be very crucial is because we need to fill in the gaps, right? Energy transition alone, you need about 637 billion ringgit under the last calculation. So and we can't put all of that on the burden of ordinary Malaysians, right? Because we can't be paying tariffs that are too high. At least for the B40 or the M40, we can't be paying taxes that are too high either, right? So I think that's the challenge that we face. And the other thing is that interestingly, just to draw on that, is the fact that since 2009. But in 2015, if you take, they were more firm, the commitment of about the developed world committing $100 billion a year to help the poorer countries to go through climate, the effects of climate change. But if you calculate, we should have more, from 2009, we should have more than $1 trillion ringgit.
Already.
$1 trillion, right, in the bank. But there's only $80 billion. Not even enough for that 1 year of 100 billion. So I think that's why loss and damage is very critical. And the fact that, yes, we've had some progress during COP28, but with the other things that we raised is one is that now it is only least developed countries and small island states are eligible for it. One can argue about Malaysia, and that's a long argument, fine, because we are high middle income. But if you took only this definition, it means that even countries like Pakistan, Bangladesh, do not qualify.
Exactly,
and
you also have to look at the fact that we are a peninsula, so naturally also the headwinds, the monsoon cycles.
It's different from a landlocked country and all that.
Sure.
So I think that is something that we want to raise. And the other thing is that as of now, I think it's being held by the World Bank. And again, you know, our call is that we have no issue, but it should not be just one bank. We know the World Bank, it's everything, a lot of things are being decided by the US there. There's a lot of red tape. And I raised this, for example, with European diplomats in Malaysia when I met them before COP, and they were open. You know, there's the European Investment Bank, there's the Asian Development Bank, Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, for example, and the African Development Bank. Why can't these banks too be able to have access to this fund? So, you know, then people will feel that it's easier countries will find that it's easier to have access and there's less red tape. So, I mean, those are the things that we think can help us improve climate financing.
Well, there are also other countries, especially from our general sector, middle-income nations, who also echoed your calls as well, YB, to look at multiple stakeholders when it comes to financing.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was a lot of countries were very supportive of that approach.
Now, Vietnam has also, interestingly enough, the government has subscribed to the JETP, the Just Energy Transition Partnership Deal. What do we understand about it insofar? And could that perhaps be something for the Malaysian government to subscribe to?
So that was, I think, announced at COP28, and you know, I was there with the Prime Minister of Vietnam during the same meeting. It's called the Coal Transition Accelerator announcement with President Macron and John Kerry. So, you know, Indonesia last year, I think, was announced as another recipient of the program. So basically, it's the developed world are promising that they will assist for some early retirement or phase out of coal for developing countries. The Philippines have had some plans with the Asian Development Bank on the same thing. But it's a very complicated thing. I mean, like I said, I mean, even in Indonesia, there's still a lot of discussions about how to actually realize this objective. So what I said then, I said, you know, we want to see how it's being done in Vietnam, in Indonesia, to see the progress. Then, you know, we will decide whether we want to take part or not. But, you know, we are also doing our RFI on decarbonization of coal. So that we are also looking at ways of how going beyond not just no new coal plants, but early retirement, or I mean some form of decarbonization for coal can be achieved. So I think that is something that we look, and we are open to the ideas. But you know, the challenge has always been that, you know, the young coal plants and all that provides a very costly effect for us to do all this, to look at these measures.
Absolutely. And moving in a little bit deeper to look at climate finance, more from a cost-benefit economic analysis viewpoint. Yang Berhormat, I must point out that all current instruments are mainly looking towards loans or debt-related, which of course then the burden once again falls upon the countries which have had contributed the least to it. What do you feel about the likelihood of us moving towards globally a shift towards an equitable share of global taxes, perhaps, measures that would not involve increasing the fiscal risk, particularly for countries in our region?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the major criticism that the developing world has, right? Not only we least responsible, most of the countries in the developing world are still living within the planetary limits, or even, you know, we have communities, even in Malaysia, but particularly in poorer countries where they don't even meet the basic levels, right? I mean, you have other people who, you know, in the rich countries, they are having
the 1%. So
the 1%, you know,
sure.
They have their jets, they have their EVs, they have their 10 aircons, swimming pools. But you have on the other end people who are still relying on generators to study at night. you know, and they still have, I mean, even in our country, people who rely on wells to get their access to water. So I think that is where this whole criticism about further burdening the developing world, you know, so we find it ironic that the developed world, you know, they lecture us, they hector us about climate change, and we have to follow this.
We suffer the brunt of it.
Yeah, and we suffer the worst brunt of it, but and we have to follow all these rigid rules and whatnot. But then suddenly, when it comes to when there's an increase in energy prices, or there's a war, or they just found some new, you know, what do you call that, oil fields, suddenly they can be pragmatic about it, right? And so I think that is a major hypocrisy. So yes, and that's why to me, more loans is not the solution, ideally. And I think we will, I think, try to work within the G77 and China group, within the various other groups as well, to find a solution to this. And I met the Brazilian environment minister, who's a long, you know, she's an activist, long-standing activist, former presidential candidate, and we spoke at length at that, and trying to find a solution that is just and fair to everyone.
Absolutely. So speaking of solutions which are just and fair to everyone, Yang Berhormat, let's move into looking at building climate resilience in especially the climate fragile scenario that we're seeing. We've had multiple flash floods just this year alone, just this month alone itself, even though it's only just early December. Let's talk about the fact of whether we do collect any gender disaggregated data, since of course global statistics also go on to show that within fragile communities, underserved communities, once again, women are then the ones who suffer the brunt of the impacts.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, from the data that we have so far, I believe there have been efforts to look at gender segregated data, but it's still at a very early stage to look at this, because definitely, I mean, if we can have more granular data, if we can have a much more multidimensional, what do you call that, framework for data, that will allow us then to be able to come up with better solutions, right? Because you know, every segment of the community is unique. We know that women, they tend to be also the biggest victims when it comes to climate catastrophes. So I think that is something that we're still developing. Similarly, things about children, you know, that is also a data that sometimes, you know, if you just report on it on a general basis, that it gets lost. You know, you don't really understand the whole impact of it. And that is something that we have to work on. And I think now the technology allows us to do so. You know, in the past it will be so tedious and difficult, but it can. And we are working to look at that angle as well.
That's very heartening, especially because aside from just women and children, even the elderly or the disabled stuck in flood-prone situations are the ones most impacted. I just wanted to highlight also that recent data that came out from Bomba, our fire services, identified in excess of 5,000 odd sites around Malaysia, which are the most flood-prone. Sarawak, of course, came in as one of the most flood-prone states, followed by Sabah, Pahang, Johor, Kelantan. So these heavy rains, flash floods, etc., that we've especially been seeing more exacerbated, we definitely feel, over the past 2 to 3 years. What are some thoughts, perhaps even initially, looking at the fact that when it comes to environmental sustainability, this is something likely your ministry will be able to look at in much deeper detail?
Yeah, so I think we've shifted our approach now, and you know, we for example, I had an event with the former Dutch Prime Minister Mark Rutte when he came over. Malaysia has a collaboration with the Netherlands when it comes to dealing with floods, and you know, the Netherlands is world famous for how they built their country.
Yes.
Yeah, their boulders and dikes. So. And I think, but that, and you know, so, and even in Malaysia, for example, one of our most important achievements was the what do you call that, the smart tunnel that we have in KL, and that has averted floods that used to happen in the city centre. But there is a limit to grey infrastructure. We are still investing a lot. I mean, I think in our accelerated flood projects, about 11 billion ringgit for flood mitigation. You know, and that's happening. I mean, we can't rule out grey infrastructure, but we also have to look at nature-based solutions, at green approaches. You know, when you are now, we are covering almost our entire cities with roads and pavements and hard surfaces. Then obviously, you know, you're going to accelerate the speed of water that goes into the waterways, right? And that also creates floods. So those are things that we have to work around. You know, how we can use natural features that blend in with the environment in order, and some of them can be cheaper to deal with these problems on a long-term basis. And I think this is an approach that is now being looked at by Plan Malaysia, by the KPKT ministry, but also by our ministry, so that we can have a more holistic approach to fighting these floods.
Exactly, green solutions as well. Now, it's also interesting, I just wanted to bring it up, the fact that actually creating green jobs can actually be far more sustainable and create more opportunity than even oil and gas. Any thoughts about how this should look like within the medium to long term for Malaysia, especially as we are really looking at transitioning away from, of course, coal and fossil fuels?
Yeah, I mean, I think that is something that we have to think of, because I think, you know, we have a very well-developed oil and gas sector. It's a lucrative job, it's a highly skilled job, and it's a job where, you know, where I think, you know, Malaysia has done well in terms of getting people to work in that sector, they're well paid, and now some of them are going to the Middle East, the US, Russia, and whatnot to work in oil and gas, and that's a major success. So when I mean, the signs are clear now. The fact that in COP28, you know, that word of transition away from fossil fuels. So, and I know that, for example, Petronas is investing a lot in the transition as well. So, how do we convert this lucrative fossil fuel jobs into productive green jobs is a crucial thing, and this can be done. You know, obviously, I think almost the direct similarity you can find with hydrogen, and that's another potential source of green energy, but also things like possibly nuclear and even what do you call that, solar panel installations and whatnot are relatively similar. In our country, we don't find it viable yet, but TNB, for example, has invested in wind turbines in UK, and those are jobs which the offshore ones are just similar to the ones that you work in offshore oil fields in some of the jobs. So I think that those are things that we have to plan properly, because otherwise... So
we're not taken by surprise or a loss of course, income and industries.
Yeah, and we've seen that. I mean, we've seen the backlash in the UK. You've had the strong cross-party consensus since the days of the Labour Party, Gordon Brown, 2008. Then you had a series of Conservatives prime ministers, and they were all relatively agreeable with regards to the climate change policies. Then suddenly, you know, we had a recent by-election, and because of they wanted to introduce the ultra-low emission zone for cars to be slow and for old cars to be scrapped. Then there was a backlash.
And decommissioning so many cars.
Yes, and a lot of both politicians on both sides suddenly now are scared of environmental policies. So I think it's important, because at the end of the day, I think while a lot of people are now being more aware, especially the young, with regards to climate change and environmental sustainability, but the general public is still more concerned on bread and butter issues. And that's not a Malaysian thing, it's a global thing.
Of course.
So and you can see even in the US, what Biden did is the Inflation Reduction Act. That was basically the legislation to bring in more green investments and whatnot. They did not call it as a green, green policy or whatnot, but as an Inflation Reduction Act. They linked it to energy independence and more jobs for the people.
Very clear indeed. And perhaps if we could spend a minute or so speaking about expanding the wider net of climate injustice. Now, we would be remiss if we were not to mention, YB, the fact that climate injustice is also at the heart of many global conflicts. Let's look at how some of the gravest issues relating to the current, of course, Israeli occupation of Palestine and Gaza in particular, and how it also ultimately does connect back to climate as well as degradation of environment.
Yeah, I mean, I think we raised that as well in Dubai, because I said that you can't, and it's not just me. You had South Africa, you had Turkey, you had a few South American countries.
That's right.
Talking about it, because you can't talk about climate change without talking about Palestine. Because if you look at Gaza, for example, one of the major statistics of the injustice that's happening there is like how much water does an Israeli citizen have as opposed to a Palestinian, and obviously that's a very environmentally sensitive area. Similarly, the impacts of the bombings and whatnot, and it's a fight for resources, right, for people to get the best source of water and all that. So I think we need to look that, there was a saying, I think, by one of the international statesmen, that in the 20th century, the conflicts were about oil and gas. But in the 21st century, the conflicts will be about water, because the demand on water is getting higher. Water stress is prevalent across the world. Even in Malaysia, places where we did not see that, we wouldn't imagine that this would happen in Malaysia. Now it's becoming more common. So when that happens, any place where there's water and all that will be a source of conflict. It will be the cause of violence and wars. So that is why it has to be managed properly. We need more multilateral understandings on these things, on sensitive matters, so that we can resolve these issues peacefully without going through conflicts.
And climate resilience, of course, to build that is a human right. To end off, YB, with your last comments, moving forward as a brand new ministry, what can we expect for not just for the rest of 2023, but 2024 and beyond?
Well, I think we'll put a lot of focus with regards to the conservation of our forests, our wildlife. Malaysia has just joined the Big Cats Alliance, which is headed by India. And India has a very successful program with regards to restoring the wild tiger and lion populations. So it's something that we can emulate. Conservation of our forests. We need to keep up the positive trends of reduced deforestation and hopefully eventually put a stop to it, because we are 54%, we promised 50%, so we need to guard it very carefully. And then obviously on the other side of the coin, on environmental sustainability and climate change, we need to update our laws. It's something that I've started working on when I became Minister of NRECC. So I hope to continue that, because our environmental, the current law that we have, it came from the 1970s.
Sure.
And it was more of a public health lens rather than a proper environmental lens, because it was very new. Even in the UK and US, they just started having the environment ministers at that time. So I think we need to update that to cater to the demands of today. Plastics, now hopefully I can put more focus on reducing single-use plastics, and where we cannot avert, then really biodegradable plastics to be ready there to replace all single-use plastics. And then and then obviously climate change, to get that to be really embedded with all our policies.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Ahmad, for your time, and we wish you all the best.
Thank you.
Well, that's all we've got time for today on Niaga Spotlight. I'm Tamina Kowsji signing off for now. We'll be back, of course, next Friday with more business analysis and insights. Here's to a productive week ahead.